For those of you that don't know, I'm Ben Greiner. With me is Chad Calise
Hi.
and Michelle Charles. Michelle, I think
Afternoon.
you're muted if you said hi. So, okay, let me share my screen. Today we're going to be talking about VisionBot and reviewing everything that VisionBot can do, because it can do a lot and it's constantly changing and getting updated. And we just rolled out some updates even this week. And this week is only Tuesday, but it feels like it should be Thursday. So um, I don't know.
Totally.
Does anyone else feel that way?
Yes. Last week flew by, but this week is a totally different pace.
Yeah. So yeah, if anyone does have questions, please submit them in the chat. Michelle or Chad, maybe you can help me keep an eye on that. And then if it makes sense, we can unmute your microphone and you can, say a few words if that's easier. Just let us know. So I'm going to do share Safari. And you guys can see my VisionBot screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Thanks for confirming. So obviously your view of VisionBot is going to look much differently. I'm logged into a demo site, which has a lot of problems because that's great for showing problem areas. Let me move this over here. So I want to just start by saying some of you will have groupings here. Some of you may not. If you don't have any groupings, you might get dumped into the device area. If you do have groupings or you want groupings or you want to change your groupings, reach out to us. Sometimes it's easy based on what you need. Sometimes it's a little more complex. Typically, we group into either locations if you have multiple offices, or departments if you have, say, a creative team versus an account management or sales team versus maybe a C-level team. So we've kind of tried to show some groupings here. We've got corporate, we've got techs, we've got this other one, AB graphic design, more of a test for demonstration purposes. And then we have another group that doesn't have anything in it at the moment. We probably built this for a demo and just let it sit here. But you can even have groupings within groupings. So here's an organization with additional groups. Not to say we want to do that in all cases, but if you have an idea for how you'd like to see your devices organized, let us know. Let's go back to the root level where we can see all the devices. And I want to let everyone know right away, you can also sort by Mac devices, Mac only, and that may be all that you have in your view of VisionBot. Some of our clients also have iOS devices. Those could be iPhones, iPads, Apple TVs, even iPod touches. And then there's other, and other, you might see your Windows machines. Some of our clients have Windows machines, or in this case, on these demos, I think these are VMs, virtual machines, so they're not real machines. So VisionBot doesn't know that, well, they're not a Mac or iOS, they're just a virtual machine, so they get thrown into other. So I'm going to focus on the Macs because that's what most people have in the system, and the structure and setup is very similar for iOS, but there are some differences and there are some limitations that we have on iOS. And VisionBot is really built to show us problem areas, and that's really all we're concerned about. If everything is good, if everything is all green as it is here, everything's good. We don't really need to care about it or be drawn to it in any way. We're really just concerned about these problem areas. And so I'm going to go through all the problem areas. Now, you may not see all of these problem areas because you may not have these problems. This is a demo area, so it has all the problems listed, but you may only see a handful. And there are varying degrees of problems, and maybe problems is too strong a word. They're notifications or FYIs in some cases. So the first one at the top of the list is check-in. Are the devices checking in? Because if they're not, there's a good chance that the data is completely inaccurate, or there could be a reason why the device is checking in. It could, or not checking in. Maybe it's in a drawer and we know that. There's no way it's going to check in. Or maybe we think it should be checking in, but it's not. So is it not being used? Has it been replaced? Is there something broken that doesn't allow it to check in? So if you look at your check-in list and you see something that doesn't make sense, like, well, that device should be checking in, we should look into investigating that and fixing it. But if you know that person's on vacation, or that person it's a spare computer in a drawer, then obviously it's not going to be checking in. There are two levels of check-ins. Actually, no, there might only be one level. I'm trying to remember. Well, here,
Yeah,
the help menu. The help menu would tell us. What's that
oh, I have a
question?
question.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It would be helpful to maybe talk a little bit about the kinds of these alerts that our team responds to pretty commonly, and the kinds of problems that maybe they don't respond to.
yeah,
Maybe that would help.
yeah. Thanks, Chad. And to back up a bit, every one of our primary contacts has access to VisionBot. And if you don't have access, let us know. We can get you access. Once you have access, you have the ability to add more people to your version of VisionBot. I'm in a restricted demo area, so I don't have the little people icon, but all of our primary contacts should have that little people icon, which would allow you to invite your other team members into VisionBot. We can also do that for you, but it's even easier if you manage your team, so you can see exactly who has access to your data, and you can even restrict people to see only one area versus all areas. So keep that in mind. VisionBot is also built, and the reason we give it to our primary contacts and our clients is the world is constantly changing. Devices are always in flux. There are lots of things that go on within your team or department that we maybe don't hear about, or we hear about after the fact. And so we really need, it's a group effort to kind of look out for problem areas. So as Chad mentioned, we are focused on some, but not all of these areas. Or in some cases, we will have an automated alert or sometimes a manual reach out to someone saying, hey, I noticed your device is not checking in. What's going on? We'll say that in a much nicer way than I just said it, but what's going on? And the problem is, if that person doesn't work for you anymore, that message goes nowhere. And in an ideal world, they leave your company, termination checklist gets created, and a ticket gets created on our side, and we help you, and we go through the process, and we do something with their device. But that doesn't always happen. So it is important as a primary contact, especially one that should be getting weekly email summaries. If I go to my profile, subscribe to weekly report, I strongly encourage everyone who's a primary contact to subscribe to that report. Once again, you go up to your name up here, my profile, subscribe to weekly report. Every Monday morning, you'll get a summary of what's going on in VisionBot. And if you see something, say something, open up a ticket, because we may rely on automation. We may have reached out to someone who is working for you, but not checking their email or making it a priority to respond to us. Or maybe they don't work for you. So we all need to work together on helping follow up on these alerts.
What are some of the most common ones are like, drives fill up, right? Things like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
back fail. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll get to that as I go down the list here. So the first one is the check-in. Is the device checking in or not? And if you're not sure about what that means, there's a help menu that talks about the check-in. And in this case, 28 days, which is quite a long time. But we played around with different days, and we were a little more aggressive earlier on, and the feedback we got was that it was too aggressive. It was too annoying. There were times when people went on, I don't know if they went on a month-long vacation, maybe in Europe, but I don't know too many people here that do that. That would be nice. but maybe they did intentionally put the machine aside, knowing that they're not going to use it for a while. So we don't alert until 28 days. It doesn't turn red. Let's go to the next one, workload. Workload is something that we created to try to give some information, some data behind that. I won't say it's common, but common enough that we had a need to build this, which is, hey, my computer feels slow. Well, there's some data points we can look at regarding memory, CPU load, and uptime sometimes plays a part in that. And if you hover or click on the question mark, it talks about free memory, CPU load, and uptime, and how that plays a part in all of this. And basically, if we see those numbers getting toward yellow or red, we highlight it, and that typically means that the machine is being taxed. Either a runaway process that needs to be reset. That's why uptime is important. Sometimes just restarting the computer will fix that. It could be that the machine is legitimately being pushed beyond what it can do. And we've had a handful of clients come to us, as an example, who have outdated machines, or MacBook Airs are a common one. And the MacBook Airs are really entry-level machines intended to hit a price point and a size. They're very light. But they're ideal for students, they're ideal for home users. They're not often ideal for power users or business users. They can very easily hit the limits of what they can do. If you're running an Excel sheet with lots of cells, the MacBook Air is going to start slowing down. And we now have the data to kind of stand behind that. Now, keep in mind, if you have a bunch of these in yellow and you're concerned about it, let us know. We can take a look at it. We have, over the years, had to tweak this because the devices are constantly changing. And in the beginning, similar to the check-in, we were a little too aggressive, and we were highlighting machines that were yellow that really, there were too many machines that were yellow, right? And so we're trying to find a happy medium where it's like, well, we think based on these data points, this is a legitimate, concern. But everyone's different and everyone uses a computer differently. So it takes some investigation. These are guidelines to help us investigate. They're not always end all be all. So they're open to interpretation. But so far, from what I've seen, and in our demo, we only have one machine showing, an abnormal CPU load. Most of the time, this makes sense. Only rarely do we find something that is maybe something that needs to be corrected on our end, meaning the data points need to be corrected. Normally, this stuff can be explained and should be explained. One last thing about this, and I know I'm getting into the weeds, Chad. Maybe you should have stopped me 5 minutes ago. But some of this stuff, if you're doing video rendering and you're doing it for several days straight, yes, you're probably going to see a heavy tax on the workload area of your computer. But once you stop, that's going to correct itself. So it's really only a concern if it's ongoing and consistent, and we have no idea why. We should investigate that. On the flip side, sometimes we have people say, my machine is slow. We go in here, there's no workload issue at all. So we know right away the machine's doing fine. It's something else. Let's investigate something else.
It's important to make sure that we transmit to anyone listening that sometimes that's an indication of something much more common these days, which is, malware. That's a pretty common one. If a machine is, someone clicked on something maybe they didn't want to click on, sometimes that produces a result. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they click on it and they think, oh, nothing happened, so it's probably okay. And then a few days or even sometimes a few hours later, we start to see this kind of behavior. And so this is useful to us in a lot of contexts. It's, to Ben's point though, sometimes it's hard to tell without some further investigation.
Right. I mean, almost every other data point in here is very black and white. It's like, it's either checking in or not. The hard drive is full or not. The battery is good or not. Workflow is the one exception to that. It's a bit of our experience and data points that we feel when they reach a certain level. We had to make a determination on that, and we have changed it over the years. So just keep that in mind. But everything else we talk about is pretty much pure data. You can't really argue against the data. And battery, when it comes to battery, what we're looking at here is how the computer reports battery health. And there are a couple different ways to do this. So we have chosen the one that is that Apple supports, meaning if we have to call Apple Care or take a computer in to get repaired, this is what they're going to look at. So if a computer is having poor battery health, this one is yellow, it hasn't failed yet, it's yellow, then in this case that means that the battery's not as good as it used to be. Now this is a mid 2011 computer, and to be fair, it also hasn't checked in since August 2019, so we've kept it in here for demo purposes, but at the time it would make sense that this battery was failing after 8 years of use. So some of this stuff
That's
is just
pretty
like,
good, actually. Yeah.
But sometimes a battery is failing and the machine is under warranty, and if that's the case, you want to get it repaired while it's under warranty, because it's a free repair. You don't want to wait for it to expire and then try to get it repaired, because Apple's gonna charge you for it. So yeah, battery, and here we have 3 with poor conditions. Here's hard drive. We have 2 levels of hard drive. We've got anything over 90% is just FYI yellow. Anything over 95%, 95% full is warning, you need to start doing something about this. And I know a lot of people ignore this. A lot of people, in fact, I think if I went to my own machine, I might see I might be in the yellow for this. But when it gets to red, it is seriously time to do something, because when you're at 95% full on your hard drive, and the computer basically uses all the memory that it has, the random access memory, the RAM, and when it runs out of that, which it will almost always pretty quickly run out of, the more windows you open, the more things you do, it eventually runs out of RAM. It looks to your hard drive for virtual RAM, virtual memory. And if there's no hard drive space for that, then it's going to really start to crawl down and slow down. And as you're creating more documents and adding more files and downloading things from the internet, and even just browsing the internet and creating temporary cache files, everything just gets slower and slower, because now it has to find a place to put that. And the place to put it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually, if you let it go too far, the computer will just, after warning you, us warning you, the computer warning you, it will literally just lock up. And sometimes that's the end. You just need a new hard drive. Sometimes we can get in just enough, maybe through terminal or something, or through an external connection, and delete enough files to free up space so it can work. But it is super dangerous. I mean, I've seen people push this to 99% and they still don't take it seriously until it's too late. So this is one of the biggest things that we see that people tend to ignore. And I get it. We're all busy. We'll clean that up later. And sometimes later never happens. Chad, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I like everything in my real space to be pretty clean and organized. But I must admit, sometimes I also have a dumping ground in my virtual space, my hard drive space. And I was thinking, if there was a way to visualize for people what their virtual space really looked like, they would be totally motivated to go clean it up. But I've not really figured out how to do that.
It's funny. My world's kind of the opposite. My physical world sometimes is a little cluttery, but my virtual one is pretty exquisite. And so it really, it's a personal thing. Everybody manages things differently. Some people just, have everything on their desktop, right? I don't have a single icon on my desktop. My desktop is just a picture, because I don't really use the desktop. I don't really keep files locally anymore. I mean, most of
Mhm.
everything that I work with is in, on someone else's computer in the cloud somewhere. And so it depends on how each, some of us use mail clients and actually check email on our device. Some are on a web browser. So there's a lot of options, and it's worth asking, right? If someone has a pain point, it's always worth asking us, because sometimes a small tweak, right? My kids joke with me all the time, because I'll say something like, "Oh, is that an extra click?" And they'll say, "Well, Dad, it's just one more click." I'm like, "Okay, well, one click a day is not a big deal. But over the course of a year, that's a lot of clicks." And so we have this kind of running joke
Hundreds
about,
of thousands of clicks. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's kind of fun once you get, the team, kind of synchronized and thinking this way, like, how can we streamline? Because time is valuable, right? We can't make any more of that. So anything we can do to streamline a workflow and make things friendlier, sometimes one small little tweak helps clean up a workspace. You would be amazed.
Yeah. And the desktop, you reminded me that it is still a legitimate thing if you have so much on your desktop that every time you move a window, if it has to redraw the desktop and you've got all these previews and everything and thousands, hundreds of files, it will slow you down. That's a if you've heard about it and didn't know if it was real, that is real. Apple's done a few things with the latest OS to try to help, where they've consolidated all the files into groupings. I think that's what they call it. So you'll get like your documents folders, or folders documents. Here, I can look at my desktop.
The only drag about people that don't
Mhm.
keep stuff on their desktop is they're lousy April Fool's prank targets. Because you used to take a screenshot of someone's desktop,
Oh
right,
yeah, yeah,
and replay it. So I mean, that's one of the downsides. If people clean up their desktops, and then they're no fun to play pranks on anymore.
yeah. Well, I go through phases where I'll clean everything up, and then during the course of the day, I'll get all messy again, and then I'll clean it up. So I know I'm not as bad as some people, but I'm not going to say I'm excellent at this either. And I think a lot of it is because it is virtual. You don't see it in the same way that you see the real world. So I get it, but this is important. Okay, enough about that. Let's move on to backup. So backup, now we're in transition with backup. We're moving from CrashPlan to Druva. So I think well, here we've got one Druva. Let's say most of our examples here are still showing CrashPlan. And if CrashPlan doesn't, back up in over 3 days, yellow, 7 days, red, and the same with Druva. So we've got a Druva backup here. Now we also have Time Machine. In fact, I think VisionBot is the only solution I know of that will help you centrally manage Time Machine. I'm not a big fan of Time Machine, especially in business. I've seen it fail too many times, and people don't realize that, and they let it go on and on and on, and then they need it, and it's worthless. So from a business standpoint, I don't necessarily support it, but from a home standpoint, certainly it's better than nothing. And it does work really well when it works. It's just unfortunate that when it fails, it it's ugly.
And I have to chime in here too, because I have been in two, in my illustrious technology career, two situations where it was mission critical. In both cases, I was coming onto the scene to fix some, disaster,
Mhm.
with people that I hadn't met before. They were in a situation, and somebody, however, I got into these situations, and in both of these situations, they only had Time Machine backups of critical, like, file servers. They were using Time Machine, which
Mhm.
is great, right? It's better than nothing, like you said,
Right.
Ben. But in both of these situations, the backup was corrupted in some way and was unusable. No one had tested it. And so my only caveat that I like to, offer to people through failures of my own, is, if you're using that, that's cool. Just do a test every now and then. Do a test
Mhm.
every, once a year, something like that, just for peace of mind, because the whole purpose of that is that you would only need it when something really bad happens.
Yeah.
And when something bad happens, we have to make sure that it's going to be of, value to us.
Right. Yeah. Always test your backup periodically. And From our perspective, this is just a great indicator to have when we're helping with the machine. But the ultimate source of truth, well, the ultimate source of truth for Time Machine is your computer. Unfortunately, that information can be misleading, so you have to do a physical restore to actually test it. But we also have a Druva web console, and we had a CrashPlan web console when we were using that. So that has even more data. And that's something else. This is really, all this data is really a layer that's pulling from different areas and presenting it in a nice, clean, easy way for all of us to see here. There's always more information to go investigate.
With
Okay.
visibility, it's worth mentioning the value of visibility, right, from a security and resilience perspective. When we don't have visibility into these kinds of characteristics or information about the machines that we're using and our company and our team are
Mm-hmm.
using, we're in the dark, and it makes it really hard to protect the organization. It makes it really hard to respond to an incident in an
Mm-hmm.
organization. It makes so many things very difficult when we don't have this visibility. So it's a useful tool in so many contexts.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chad. Let's see, the next one is inactive devices. And this is something that we developed, and I don't know that this is our most successful feature because it requires a little extra work to get something marked as inactive and then bring it back out. So the goal, long-term goal, is to eventually give you, our clients, the ability to mark something as inactive and essentially silence and gray out all the alerts. We implemented that step one. We haven't fully implemented it. I'm not even sure if it works with our new Adigy system. So that's something we'll come back and look at later. If anyone has a really strong need for this feature in active devices, let us know. Maybe we can revisit that. But that's the concept here, is let's mark something. We know it's inactive, but we want to keep it in the system so that we can decide to use it later or recycle it, or know what our options are when we need a spare Mac. Recycle, this is a relatively new feature, and this is something that's really exciting because the recycle market for Apple products has really grown over the last several. I mean, it's always been there, but it's even easier now. Apple makes it easy, and then we partnered with a company called Second Life Mac, which is here in the Chicago suburbs, to help recycle. And there are some differences between Apple's program and Second Life Mac. Second Life Mac will often go back as far as 10 years. If you have a device that's within 10 years of being manufactured, they can pay you something for it and find someone to either, they'll resell that device or recycle it. Apple won't go back quite that far. I don't know. They don't say what their cutoff is, but I know oftentimes they'll say, hey, it's great that you want to recycle your device, but we're not going to give you, anything for it. They may not even ship you a box. They'll just ship you a label. So Second Life Mac will go further back to older machines. They will often pay a little bit more money, and they will often pay with a check or cash, as opposed to Apple doing a gift card. Now, Apple does have a business way of getting you cash. It's a little more effort you have to put into it. But our recommendation, that is, if your machine is 4 years or older, consider trading it in and getting some of that money back to buy a new machine. 3 years is the maximum warranty that Apple will give you, or you can buy from them. 1 year is default. You can add an extra 2 years through AppleCare for a total of 3. And then most Macs are reliable enough that you can, in the business world, get maybe another year, a 4th year out of them. But beyond that, I question whether it's wise to keep running these older machines. So we've made it very easy. Go to your recycle tab. If you don't have a tab, that means you don't have any machines older than 4 years, or we haven't yet, if you bought a new machine, we haven't yet put the date, purchase date, and warranty in there. That's something Michelle's been helping us with. Because of our system change, we had to change the way we get purchase and warranty information in here. So if you see something that doesn't make sense to you, let us know. We can get that fixed. But for the most part, recycle tab, generate a report, and I'm going to go back to generate a report in a minute, but only when you're on the recycle tab and you generate a report will you get this little get a quote to recycle your devices area, where you can basically, download the CSV file and then upload it to this page. And this page has a little file, so you can just choose that file you downloaded and fill out the form, and they'll give you a quote for what they will pay you for these devices. Now, they'll give you a box, shipping label, you'll send it in. If you think you have an A rating, just to give you a heads up, you might actually have a B or a C rated device, which means you may not get maximum dollar, but still it's pretty good. The reason machines get rated A, B, C, I think they even have D and F, is based on, scratches on the screen or the outside of the device, whatever would cause it to lose its resale value, because Second Life Mac is actually trying to resell the device rather than break it down into a recycling facility. Any questions about that?
And Patty asked, what's the average amount you get back from recycling in chat?
Yeah, that's so hard to say. That's a great question, but it's so hard to say because it is all over the place. You can imagine if a machine is 1 year old versus 10 years, if it's originally priced at $5,000 versus $900, it's all over the place. So you can get a quote from them. You can also go to Apple Trade-in if you want. And we could take any one of these computers. We could grab the serial number. And
it might be worth mentioning, though, just in passing, that the higher end devices that we buy always have a higher resale value. So, for example, if we buy the cheapest Mac that we can buy, we can expect little to no resale value after 4 or 5 years. Right. But if, and this is a kind of an old as the hill sort of debate too. I mean, that's why Patty's question's so great. If we, every time that we do buy a low end Mac, in a way, we're kind of already buying something that's obsolete. Right. And that's tricky. Right. It depends on the purpose that we need it for. But the high end stuff, MacBook Pros, for example, in the laptop world, with maxed out RAM and storage, those things are going to have, in some cases, exponentially more resale value. So it's something just to keep in mind when you're buying new devices. Yeah,
there was a recent report, I can't remember now who put it out, but it talked about how the upfront cost of an Apple device is typically, we all know, more expensive than a Windows PC. But the resale value at the end of 3, 4, even 5 years is so much higher that, it pretty much, the calculation was that you're better off buying a Mac than a PC if you look at the total cost of ownership. And there are a lot of other things that went into that report.
Every consumer device is only good for 3, 4 years. It doesn't really matter what kind of computer we buy. It's only going to have a lifespan of that 3 to 4 years from a business perspective, unfortunately.
But you're right. If you buy an entry-level MacBook Air, it's going to be worth a lot. It costs less to buy, and it's going to be worth a lot less, down the road. Especially if you don't add more memory, RAM. Here's the memory. Now, this is an older iMac from 2015 that can still be upgraded. In fact, we have a link here. If I click on it, it'll show me where I can go buy RAM modules to max this out to 32 gigs. But a lot of newer machines, you have to buy the RAM from Apple, and you can't do it later. So you'll see some of these devices, and this is, okay, here's one. It's got 16 out of 16. It's not upgradable. Sometimes people will buy the default or entry level 8 gigs because they want to save a couple $100. So it'll say 8 gigs out of 16, not upgradable. That's not going to resell as much for as much value, and it's not going to work as well. And it's totally worth spending the $200 now to get a longer, better lifespan out of that device. But very quickly, to Patty's question, what I often do for a one-off, if I'm going to send a bunch of computers in, I'll just let Second Life Mac generate that quote for me. But if I just want a quick estimate of a device, I can take, a serial number. I'll copy this. I'll go to Apple Trade-In, which is apple.com/shop/trade-in, or just Google Apple Trade-In. You'll get to this page. We can go to Mac. Oh no, we got to scroll down here to select your device. We'll say computer. And yes, it's an Apple device. And here's the serial number. And they're going to verify that. Now, sometimes they find the exact serial number, sometimes they don't. I don't understand why, but the good news is all the information you need is right here in VisionBot. So this particular model is a Mac Mini 2014. So it is a Mac Mini 2014. And now it wants to know the processor speed. This is a great demo because sometimes serial number is all you need. But in this case, it's asking a lot more information. So I go back to VisionBot and I see that it's a Core i7, a 3 gigahertz Core i7. So 3 gigahertz Core i7, this is a high-end Mac Mini. Wants to know storage. How much storage does it have? Well, it's got 120 gig storage. So 120 gigs. Whoa, we've got a problem. What? 120 gigs, that does seem low, and that's not showing up as an option. So we need to check on that, and that may be one of our new extension attributes that's not displaying correctly. But I'm going to go with 256 because that's the smallest hard drive. And does it turn on? So they basically want to know, is it broken or not? So, hey, yes, it still works. And this one doesn't have a battery, but they still always ask. And is it in good shape? Yes. Will I include the power adapters? I think you get an extra $10 or lose $10 if you say no. So in this case, I want to get $200 for a device from 2014. Technology that's 6 years old, and that's pretty
great.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
And eBay, eBay, if you have a one-off too, sometimes it's worth looking at eBay because eBay is kind of a seller's market. It's kind of a pretty good waterline for what the value of these if you were to sell it to an individual. The only note to doing that is make sure that you wipe any devices before you're doing any of this, right? Before you trade any devices in, or you sell a device on eBay, or you're going to give it to your kid before they go to college, or whatever it is. Make sure to wipe, do kind of some due diligence, and that's maybe another podcast or another webinar to talk about that.
And in our experience, Second Life Mac, will pay a little bit more than this. So I don't know, then maybe 210 or something. So if you just like the convenience of just getting that done,
that's worth something for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so let's finish going through here. We're running a little long. So we did recycling. Okay, so the last one we'll do here is the repair extension program, and then we'll do an overview of the report and the detail page. But the repair extension program, unfortunately, Apple has had quite a few of these recently. So many, in fact, that we were having trouble keeping track of them. So we developed this as part of VisionBot. So once again, you may not have this tab, or you may have a bunch of machines in this tab. And don't worry if you do, it doesn't mean you have problems. It just means your device technically falls within the range that it might qualify for the program. So Apple had a ton of MacBooks recently. You can see these are 6-month-old notebooks. In fact, here's the one with my name on it, and it's got a keyboard service program. So my particular computer might, if I'm exhibiting behaviors or troubles with my keyboard, might be able to get repaired whether I have Apple Care or not. This device does have Apple Care until 2022. If I want to know for sure, first of all, unless you're having issues with the keyboard, this does not affect you. Even if you see this, it doesn't mean you have problems. It just means your Mac may qualify. Apple doesn't tell us exactly. We have to go to this page here and read more about it. And basically, if you qualify, which this machine does, and you're exhibiting these types of problems, then we could send it in for repair. There's another one. There are a couple of them. In fact, if we go back to the back here under this information, our KBase article talks about them, and some of them actually require you to put in your serial number to further identify whether that model has the problem or not. Apple doesn't allow us to do that in mass. We have to do it one-off. So this is the best we could do, but it's still very helpful, meaning if someone calls into our office saying, hey, I've got a problem with my keyboard, and we look at this and we're like, hey, well, everything's green. Oh, but I see this. Oh yeah, chances are, boom, that's the problem. Easy fix, let's get it done. While we're here on the detail page, very quickly, I'll just go through this. Serial number, linking to our MDM system, and whether it's supervised or not. That's all information that is more detailed and for us and our team. That's a whole nother meeting on what that means. Maybe we could talk about it later. This link will give you more information on Apple's page for that device, which can be helpful. We've talked about processor, purchase date, warranty. Whether you have a warranty date or not, you can always link to Apple's page. You have to enter the CAPTCHA. And then it will dump you right into, validating July 11th, 2022. July 11th, 2022. That's what you should see there, should match up. The latest OS, the last user to log in, the location, so you can quickly get back if you want to go higher up. And then there's some IP address and MAC address information, which we use internally. There's device details. We talked about check-in. Security. Security is something that we don't actively alert on with a tab, but it can be very helpful. And the reason we don't alert on it is because not everyone enforces or has the same idea of best practices for this. But our view is that all notebooks, especially those with SSDs, and I don't think Apple's made a non-SSD notebook for a very long time, but any notebook with an SSD should be encrypted. And you want to make sure all users can get to that drive, unless there's a reason that all users should not be able to get to the drive.
And SSD, by SSD, can you explain what you're talking about, Ben?
Yeah, SSD is what's it stand for, Chad? I went blank on
solid state drive.
Oh, okay, thank you. Solid state drive, which replace the old spinning disk. So if you don't have an SSD, you have a 5,400 RPM. If you're lucky, a 7,200 RPM revolutions per minute spinning disk that is a lot slower. Even the 7,200, a lot slower.
And bigger. The solid state
heavier
drives are very small. They're much lighter. They boot fast. Like when you turn our computer on, they start up super fast. But they're more expensive. The cost is still higher than a spinning. You used to be able to hear the hard drive. Well, that's one of the things I actually miss is you could hear the computer. The computer kind of had a sound like some cars do, right? You kind of tell when it wasn't feeling so great. It's kind of hard to do that now, right, Ben?
Yeah, that's true. You just hear a faint buzzing and you wonder, if it's actually working or not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, basically you typically don't want to encrypt a spinning disk drive because it would just slow the drive down. And only iMacs today, maybe iMacs are the only ones now that have the option for the spinning disk drive. I wish Apple would just go SSD across the board, but for a long time, we only encrypted notebooks because they were the only ones leaving the office. Desktops, they don't leave the office. They were a little more well protected. Today, we would probably, if it was an SSD in the iMac, encrypt it. In fact, we would encrypt everything except for a server. We still don't like the overhead of encryption on a server that's being accessed directly all the time. And sometimes video editing workflow systems. There's a lot of reading and writing that goes on with video editing. And most people are not going to notice the difference between an encrypted drive and one that's not encrypted. But for video editing, sometimes that can be noticeable. Okay, so if you have any questions about any of this, let us know. We could go into a lot more detail on every single area. We could dissect what all this means, but I know I'm losing the audience. So let's see. We talked about battery, talked about workload, memory, storage, and backup. So the things we haven't talked about, installed applications. This is a great way to see, if someone calls in with a Photoshop issue, or you want to figure out what version of Photoshop they're running. You can quickly see version 21.1.2. Eventually, we'd like to alert right here whether they're running the latest version or not, but we haven't got there yet. Right now, it's just this is what they're running. And then recent actions, once again, more for our team, but if someone called in problem on this computer, I wanted to see the last thing that happened or recently happened that might contribute to the problem, then I would look through here. This is still kind of ugly, really meant for our team, but it's a way to see if anything that recently happened is affecting what the user is calling in about. And so going back, the last thing I want to mention is this report. If I go back to FC and I generate a report, you should all be able to generate reports. You should all be able to move columns around or hide columns if you want. And then of course, download this and open it in an Excel sheet. You can sort, you can view. I can see we've got some iPhones in here that we don't list the processor on. So if I wanted a cleaner report, I would go back and say, just show me the Macs, generate a report, and there we go. So this can be helpful. We're exploring benchmark scores. That's not fully implemented yet, so you might see benchmark scores, you might not. This gives you a relative idea of this 2010 iMac, which has a benchmark score of only 400, compared to a new MacBook Pro 16-inch with a 5,000. So that can be helpful. Once again, maybe more for our team. And I think we have some questions. So let's see. Or maybe that's just Chad giving me some encouragement. Okay, let's see. Michelle, you'll let me know if I missed any questions. And I think in summary, if there's anything you don't understand here, we'd love the opportunity to address it. It could be an opportunity for us to learn more about what you need, for us to make some changes to the way VisionBot works, and just continually improving the way that we share this information. Let me get back to, here we go. So are there any questions, Chad, Michelle, anyone else who's joined us about VisionBot? I think the only thing
Patty asked a great question.
Yeah, I just asked Pipe one, I'll just say it.
Yeah,
so
sure. Hey, Patty.
Do you just update, we actually just bought some new Macs, surprisingly. Do you automatically update those when you put them into, configure them and put them into service for us? Is it automatically updated to this VisionBot list?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, any machine that is enrolled in our system automatically gets displayed in VisionBot. The only thing that's recently changed is we've had to manually enter the purchase and warranty information. Apple is continually locking down access to this data. So they've prohibited us from, what we used to do is pull it in automatically, and now we have to go get it. So sometimes that will be delayed. And sometimes, depending on your groupings, especially if someone moves offices for the long term and we don't know about it, that may or may not get updated. Sometimes we can identify an office and automatically move a machine. Other times it has to be manually moved. So I think those are the only two areas: the purchase and warranty, manually set, and once they're set, they're done. And then the location. The only two things that we touch. Everything else is totally automated. And in fact, sometimes related to this, I've had clients say, hey, could you guys change the name of your computer in your system, because that's not the name. It's like, well, that is the name of the computer. Like, we're just presenting it. We're not making any judgment or changes to it. So we have to go on the computer itself and make the name change, or share with the client how they can do that. And once the name is changed on the device, then it gets updated in our system.
But the short answer is yes.
Yes, right.
Yes, thank you. I don't have to do anything about that.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. The other thing I was just going to mention that I didn't touch on very briefly is the additional sorting options here. So when you're here, alphabetical by default, but you can always search by age, by model, and the model mimics what you see up here with the number of notebooks and desktops. And then OS, which mimics what you see up here with the Catalina, Mojave. We've got them all here because this is really just a dumping ground for demonstration purposes. But yeah, that's VisionBot, and there is so much in here, and there's so much that's constantly changing. For example, we just added this enable all users feature because what we were finding is that some machines were encrypted, but not all people have the ability to decrypt. And that's a problem because if it's your computer and it's encrypted, but you don't have the ability to decrypt it, then you basically cannot get into your machine. So we needed a way to quickly identify if that was a problem. So this is constantly changing and evolving. And a lot of the ideas that get rolled into VisionBot come from our clients who ask questions and give us feedback. So I appreciate that. Continue to do that. If anyone has ideas after viewing this or listening, please let us know. And I think we're going to wrap because we took almost a full hour.
Great. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for everyone who joined and everyone who watches later. And we'll wrap for now. Have a great day, everyone. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.